Well, I want to start with a look at what has become a rapidly changing landscape, that of the GOP presidential candidate field. Now, we know over the weekend Herman Cain, quote, suspended his campaign. So he is out. But I want to talk about who's still in, where they stand, and what this all means for the future of our country. So, much to the dismay of quite a few people, Newt Gingrich now has a clear lead in the polls. He leads with 37% of those Republicans who were polled, compared to Mitt Romney with 22%. And Ron Paul hanging in there with 8%. Now, we've gotten to the point in the campaign, 4 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses, where all the candidates, they're not all playing nice anymore. And it's becoming clear that there are some marked distinctions between them. Here's one thing all the Republican candidates, well, all except Ron Paul, do have in common. They are all unwavering in their support for Israel. You see here, they were in Washington today addressing the Republican Jewish coalition. Ron Paul was not there because, well, he wasn't invited due to his, quote, misguided and extreme views, i.e., he doesn't support the U.S. relationship with Israel in the same way the other candidates do. I'll just play you one of his recent comments on Israel.
We don't even have a treaty with Israel. Why do we have this automatic commitment that we're going to send our kids and send our money endlessly to Israel?
Well, this is not a sentiment shared by others, but there are plenty of ways in which the other candidates do differ. Now, the surprising thing for many is just how much things can change. Michelle Bachmann, remember, won the Iowa straw poll. Rick Perry led in the polls for a week or so. Romney was the assumed frontrunner until it was Herman Cain. Now it's Newt Gingrich. This is the story on the surface, but what are the deeper implications here? It's one of the many questions I have, and to help me answer them, I'm joined in studio by Heather Siermo, conservative political commentator and strategist, as well as Daniel Faraci, director of Grassroots Political Consulting, LLC. And you guys, I want to start out really simple this evening and just sort of ask, what is, the ideal political candidate for the Republican ticket? Heather, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think the ideal candidate would be somebody who's consistent, which unfortunately two frontrunners do not have that on their resume. They are both supposed flip-floppers. My favorite candidate actually did not run, Mitch Daniels. And also a candidate needs to be a leader, someone we can trust, someone who we think actually believes what he says he believes and will lead this country in the right direction.
Dan?
I think someone who just disparages the difference between themselves and President Obama, and also has what Congress is failing the president, et cetera, in some backbone, some bold ideas, and how to move this country forward beyond having a vision for where we're going to go with this country to get it back on the track, especially fiscally, to success.
Cool. And, I showed you just a few minutes ago sort of the national polling results for this week. I want to take a look now at the latest results in Iowa. The Iowa caucus is, of course, less than 4 weeks away, if you can believe it. Take a look at these numbers. Newt Gingrich leading with 33%. Mitt Romney and Ron Paul tied with 18%. Now, these figures have swapped a lot. And some people who look at these numbers, they say, you know what, the Republicans are in the midst of an identity crisis. What do you guys think about this?
I would just jump in and say I think the Republicans are, and I was also a Mitch Daniels or Jeb Bush person, but the Republican Party is void of a conservative alternative in this election, and that's all there is to it. You had Bachmann, who wasn't adequate, Perry, who was not prepared, Cain, who had his baggage. And that simply is a simple explanation to the rise and fall of the candidates who are an alternative to Governor Romney, who the electorate is just not enthused about.
What do you think, Heather? Are the voters flip-flopping?
I don't think so. I think this is a very normal situation where, they're looking at the candidates, deciding, who they like and who they like more or less. I mean, it's our prerogative, really, to kind of, be for one person this week and for a different person next week. But I will tell you that the Republicans will unite behind whoever the candidate is, because we are all united in our desire to see Obama gone.
Let's take a look at some of the things. As we know, there have been so many debates. And so I want to take a look at some of the things the candidates have said. And I want to start with some of the past and present frontrunners.
Victory or death. We're kind of into those slogans, man.
It's great if inner city schools and poor neighborhood schools actually hired the children to do things. What if they, in that process, were actually learning to work, learning to earn money, They had money on their own. They didn't have to become a pimp or a prostitute or a drug dealer.
I believe it's absolutely essential. Africa was a country on the brink.
Now, with the president, he put us in Libya. He is now putting us in Africa.
The very founders that wrote those documents worked tirelessly until slavery was no more in the United States.
Commerce, and let's see, I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
All right, so liberty or death, let's take our kids out of school and put them to work when they're 12 years old. These are, some interesting things, and these are coming out of the mouths of people who either now or at one time were everybody's favorite. Real quick, though, I want to play some things that are said by a couple other candidates. These candidates are considered either to be on the fringe or simply too low in the polls.
Torture is illegal by our laws. It's illegal by international laws. It's also immoral.
I don't know that this country needs a trade war with China.
Is it worth going to war to prevent a nuclear weapon in Iran?
No, it isn't worthwhile.
I take a different approach on Afghanistan. I say it's time to come home.
So I guess my question for you, too, is why are the candidates who want to end the war in Afghanistan, not engage in Iran, considered to not have a chance in this race? Daniel?
Well, I would say, Governor Huntsman actually is one of the intriguing figures because he's one of the more credible candidates that should be in the top tier. I think he hired the wrong operatives, which didn't help him at first. And then on top of that, having the resume of having served as ambassador for President Obama is just not something this Republican electorate can swallow. But the ideas are provocative, and he is right on track with where a lot of the primary electorate is. As far as Ron Paul's case, he has domestic fiscal intriguing policy that has caused a lot of people to follow him for 20 some odd years. But once you go into the foreign policy arena, drug legalization, et cetera, he's just off the radar for many Republican primary electorate voters. So.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what he said. I think Huntsman has some great ideas that I hope are embraced by whoever the candidate is, and I can see him in a cabinet position, maybe even a vice presidential contender. And as far as Paul goes, I think some of his ideas are fine, but then they are completely undermined by a lot of his.
But what about?
ideas.
I can see, when we're talking about Ron Paul, certainly people find it very hard to swallow the idea of getting rid of the entire Department of Education or legalizing all drugs. But what about his stance on Iran? A lot of people have called it sort of outrageous. He simply doesn't want us to get involved with them. He doesn't want us to fearmonger about the nuclear threat there. Why is that such a contentious position? And why is Ron Paul the only one with that position?
Well, he's very isolationist, for one thing. He really does not want to get involved in much at all. And so I think that, at first that sounds great because in some ways the United States has gotten over-involved, you could argue. But really when it comes down to it, that's not realistic. We have to make decisions on who we support and whether we get involved in certain conflicts. And so I think it's just really unreasonable. He
isn't off the mark on things like that. I believe in Iran. The sentiment of most of the candidates now is that President Obama missed his opportunity in the 2008 to 2009 youth revolution to at least show verbally that the West was behind this revolution, and we probably wouldn't be having the nuclear conversation now if that would have taken place. And Afghanistan, going into that, an overwhelming majority of the American public thinks we should draw down and pull back. Pakistan is another large controversy. So I think he takes it a little too far. His messaging is not consistent, cohesive, or coherent on his policies, foreign policy-wise. But he's not that far if you really dig into the details from where most of the other candidates are.
I think certainly when we talk about Ron Paul, he certainly, at least in many cases, elevates the level of discussion and brings forth an outside perspective when everyone else is agreeing. I got to talk now about Newt Gingrich. He's in the lead right now, so we should talk about him. A lot of people worry. a lot of conservative Christians worry that if he becomes the Republican nominee, this could really change the future of how Republicans identify. It could mean some people are even calling it the death of Christian conservatism. Newt Gingrich has been divorced twice. He's been married 3 times. You know, he has gone after President Clinton while he was having an adulterous affair. And there are some groups who who say they will not stand for this. I want to play you an ad. This was put together by Iowans for Christian Leaders in Government, and then we'll talk about it.
We don't always see eye to eye, do we, Newt?
No, but we do agree our country must take action to address climate change. Sitting on the couch with Nancy Pelosi is the dumbest single thing I've done.
Would you do a type of commercial like that with her again?
Well, if they offered a chance to, sure.
Okay, so we edited this down a little bit, but this is the gist of the ad put together by this group. And there is a lot of speculation, given these new poll numbers, given Herman Cain dropping out, that Newt Gingrich really does embody all those things that Mitt Romney doesn't and could actually become the nominee. In addition to Newt's baggage, though, people worry that, you know, they worry about the religious aspect of this and it changing and not resonating with people who identify themselves as Christians. Heather, talk about this.
Well, for one thing, I don't think that, you know, Newt is really advertising himself as the conservative Christian candidate, and I don't think that it'd be wise for him to do that. It's becoming more and more apparent that he's not even really that conservative. And as far as it being the death of conservative Christianity, I don't think he's that powerful to do that. I think that, you know, people are going to make a wise decision. You know, if it's Mitt Romney versus Newt Gingrich, then I don't know where it's going to go. But the reality is that people will rally behind whoever the candidate is, because people really do think that America is at a crossroads. Are we going to go down the road that Obama is leading us down, which is more socialized government, or are we going to go back to what the founding fathers envisioned, which is America that allows you to, you know, aim high and try to achieve the American dream?
Daniel, what do you think about this? I mean, when you talk about Mitt Romney, he doesn't have the kind of baggage, but he's not a Christian. He's a Mormon. Newt Gingrich has baggage that many Christians would speak on the pulpit out against.
Well, this is a fluid conservative electorate in the middle of a social conservative early state. That's all there is to it. So these independent expenditure ads and other 501c3s and everything else that's involved is coming from other primary opponents who have seen the rise and fall of Perry, Kaine, Bachmann, et cetera, and are trying to play on vulnerability to Speaker Gingrich. Now, the fact of the matter is, Iowa is not as significant to me as any of the others. If Newt is able to pull off South Carolina and intensely competitive way in Florida and get a flood of money and get an apparatus around him, he very well could be the nominee. And I agree with Heather. I think whether it's him or Mitt Romney, everybody will rally around one or the other.
And who knows, with all the changes we've seen, who knows, maybe there's a room for a Rick Santorum or a Jon Huntsman to slide on up there. Let's stay on Gingrich for just a little longer, though, because it's interesting to just think about all the different parts of him. And I want to show you something. This was a quote said by one of his former aides. He said he's a little bit like charcoal briquettes in the backyard. When you first light them, there's a lot of smoke and fire and a lot of stuff going on. But you can't cook a steak on that. That was Rich Galen, a former aide for Newt Gingrich. What do you think he meant by that? Interpret that statement, Heather.
Well, I think he's a very passionate person. And I think...
Hence the smoke and fire.
Right, exactly. But as far as getting things done, that's where he kind of runs into some trouble. And I think one of the real challenges for Gingrich is that he does have quite a few enemies. He's been in Washington for a long time, Washington politics for a long time. That's another thing that Romney does not have. He does not have that kind of baggage. Yes, he has political, you know, opponents, but he doesn't have those kind of intense enemies that Gingrich has. That Gingrich is going to have to deal with. And so if you look at the polls, too, I think it's interesting to note that, yes, Romney has kind of gone between first and second, but he hasn't gone all the way down to 5. You know, so I think that kind of consistency is going to really play out favorably for him.
Daniel, I'll let you have the last word.
He's got an interesting history. I mean, having over 20 years in this town, all the rest, there's definitely going to be a lot of votes to leadership style opposition research. However, the ironic and most intriguing thing happening this week is the establishment is all coming out for Romney, and they are not coming out for Newt. It's the polar opposite. However, all that does is show the electorate that Romney is more the Washington insider, Newt is more the outsider, and that could create quite a narrative over the next few weeks.
I think it's hard to argue, though, that Newt is not a Washington insider, though, given all his experience here and all the major role he's played in Washington, the major ties with lobbying corporations. Certainly an interesting discussion, and, this is exciting, this political season. We have another year, a little less than this, to talk about this and see what happens, see what kind of crazy ads pop up. Conservative political commentator and strategist Heather Sirmo, as well as Director of Grassroots Political Consulting, LLC, Daniel Faraci.